Hi, my name's Steven, and want to go through a NextJS sample app that we put together for Joist, which is an ORM we've been building for a few years. Mostly built it while working on a GraphQL backend, but going through this NextJS app, we'll see how several of its features work really well for that too. And specifically what we want to look at is three things. Joist's auto batching and N+1 prevention and how it works really great in React server-side components. And the second one is how it's got a JSON payload creation capability to create kind of a tree of data to pass into your client-side components if, when you flip over from the server side to the client side. And then also kind of a bonus feature is this neat, somewhat alpha JSON preloading, JSON aggregate preloading feature that it has. So with that, let's hop into the app. This is a really simple sample app. I copied one of the Vercel Postgre examples and changed it a little bit. It's first time doing Next.js, so kind of learning as we go. But one of the things that seems interesting is you can kind of pick in your app when you flip over from the React server side to the client side, and either keep a lot of components React server side and make database calls or whatnot as you go down the tree, keep making database calls, or you can kind of flip over early, in which case you kind of have one up front. Loading of data that then you prop down through. So, and Joist can work for both, so we'll kind of look through both. Right now, I don't have any authors in the database, so let's run a seed. Here's the seed that I'm going to run. So Joist creates, it's entity based, so if you have an author table and a book table, you get an author TS and a book TS, kind of domain objects. And it also makes factories out of the box, so this was code gen for us, and then you can customize it, but we're going to make three authors just for the demo, Bob, Fred, Mary. And then the factories let you create a subgraph of data at once. So we're just going to make 3 books, 1 book, 2 books. But you could go, if the books had reviews, we could, keep going inside of here. Or, if we wanted to specify what the book title was, we could put that here. But the factories, only for test, shouldn't ever use these in production, but they'll fill in any required fields or foreign keys, to get the graph valid input in the database. So let's run this real quick. Run our seed, and so now if we refresh, we should see, 2 sides of the same data. So we've got our 3 authors with like an author card for Bob, for Fred, and for Mary, and then the 3 books, 1 book and 2 books, and on both sides. So this is mostly client-side components, and this one's mostly server-side components. Just doing the same thing, and we can use a server-side action to add a book. Right now we have to hit refresh, but you'll see the new book for Fred shows up on both sides. Okay, pretty simple. So let's switch over to the code. Right now we have a top-level table component that is rendering both sides, just for the demo. And so we're going to do one query up front to load all of the authors. This where clause is empty, just because it's a demo, but Joist supports pretty typical, query building-ish things for your where clauses, but we'll skip over that. Here's the server-side action that adds a book. We won't go too deeply into that, but it's just kind of showing how, given an ID, we can load an author, create a book, and then use this entity manager. Oh yeah, so we should. So Joist uses a entity manager / like unit of work pattern. So this entity manager should be created once per request, and it will then cache and batch any operations you do. And not only batch reads, but also batch writes. So we are using this React 18 or 19 or whatever cache function to create this just once per request. And we're just going to create the entity manager against the database driver, which is, right now we only support Postgre, but that's what that is. And so we'll come back here and just read all of the authors, which is a pretty straight SQL call. And then if we go down and look at what we're actually rendering. So here's our client-side tree, which is the left side of mostly client-side components. We've got the author React client component card, and then the server side is the React server-side card. Let's go into the server-side one first, because this will show our N+1 prevention. So you'll notice that so far we've just loaded all of the authors, and we're inside of each author card. We're just going to pass the entity straight up, which we can do because this is server-side. Like if this, the entity author entity here couldn't be sent to the client side because it's, it's got a connection to the database or these sort of things. But within each author card, we realize that, well, we want to render the books. And so one way of doing that is to, which this is one of the features of Joist, is that all of the collections are type safe. So if I initially wanted to say, with my author, go to my books and like get them and like console log them or something like this, you're not allowed to do that because the type system knows that the collection's not actually loaded into memory yet. I mean, it may or may not, right? Like some other code may have loaded it, but the type system doesn't know. And so you can call load if you want to explicitly load this one collection, which will be a promise. Or you can use these populate methods, which take I'm just asking for books to be loaded, but you can also pass a literal to kind of deeply load. I don't have reviews in the domain model yet, but to deeply load the subgraph of data that you want. And then once you do this, the types change. So it's kind of hard to see, but if you hover over this, this is no longer just an author entity. The type of this is actually a loaded author books type, which marks this book relation as now gettable. So when I get down here into the actual code, I can loop over books just like it's an array with no asyncs. And this will work deeply. If I had done, I should put reviews in the domain model to see it, but if reviews was here, we could, flat map or nest into the reviews all with the gets, which is really handy. Like, because if you are trying to do this with collections that you have to, promise a weight and promise all, every single time you nest another level, it gets really annoying pretty quick. So that's for sure one of Joist's big ergonomic wins, is to be able to like mark a subgraph of your data as all synchronous and then just write regular collection codes over it. But what we really want to talk about is the N+1 prevention. So, we're rendering 3 author cards here, Bob and Mary and Fred, which looks like it could be an N+1. But if we look at that's interesting output. Let's clear that. There we go. Okay, so here we're rendering the top level table, and we can see that initial select star from authors is our upfront EM find, and then below that we have only one more query, which is selecting all the books against an array of author IDs. So Joist has seen that we're rendering card 1, card 2, card 3 basically simultaneously. So it's using the Facebook data loader behind the scenes to batch these into, just load, go get all books for authors 1, 2, and 3. And this would work however many levels of nesting you had. If you had a review card below this and a rating card below that and whatnot, Joist will fundamentally make only one database call per level of your hierarchy, which is really amazing. This is something that Joist, coming from GraphQL, is obviously a really foot gun in the GraphQL world. But since building this into Joist and running it in production, we haven't had an N+1 in years. They just don't happen, which is great. So and it works great, obviously in GraphQL, but in any JavaScript, for loop iterum. So React server components or REST endpoints or whatnot. And good, so this was server-side components. Let's go back and look at our client-side components. So on the client side, if we go look at the author client-side card, it can't take an author entity, right? The author entity is a back-end only thing, and so we need to make a tree of JSON to pass to the client side. And we're going to represent that as this author payload type, which if we go look at this, this is a Joist feature of, which is a kind of newer one, so we'll see how it gets built out. But we're going to take our entity, our author entity, and then say, create a JSON hint, is the work in progress name for this JSON hint, of what we want to put on the wire, right? So the author might have a SSN field or a password field, which obviously we don't want those to go on the wire. So this JSON hint lists only the fields that you want to put on the wire. But it can be nested, just like the load hint. So besides the author's first level fields, let's do the books. And if I wanted the books to also do reviews, you could nest into the reviews as well. And then when we get this JSON payload and we pass the author and the type, this author payload is then strongly typed. So it has only ID. It might be hard to see in the little popover, but or tooltip, but we've got only ID, first name, and books, and the books only has ID, title, forward, which should work really well for if your REST endpoint or whatnot already has a type that you need to match and could be nested. Or these React client-side cards, where we want to take the props down. We get really strong type checking on what our payloads are. But also just ergonomic, right? Like if we need another field, and also like this will load books if books is not loaded, and if books had reviews, it will load the reviews if they're not loaded. So it takes care of both loading and JSONification, creating your payload at the same time. So let's go back to see how we use that. So in our client-side tree, we're mapping over the authors. toJSON does create a promise because it might go lazy load some of that data from the database. So we do have to do it in an await. But what's interesting here is that this is also n+1 deduped, right? And not only for the client-side tree itself, like we rendered 3 authors and we called toJSON 3 times, but we only saw 1 SQL call. You'll notice that we also did caching of the left side of our client-side tree, asked for the 3 author books. And then again, the server side also asked for the 3 author books. But if we look at our SQL calls, we really only did 1. So this is Joist not only doing n+1 prevention, but caching at the request level of what relations have already been loaded or not. And yeah, just in the pros and cons of when do you cut over from client-side components to React server components or not. One of the cons of the cutting over to the client side is you have to end up creating this tree of data that the top level component needs to know the whole tree that all of the clients will use, and then you prop drill through it. So it seems, I haven't done NextJS in production, but it does seem nice that you would kind of keep your components server side as long as possible to really democratize the data loading and the implementation details of what components need what data. Further down the tree to just where the data is loaded. And really that is what I think would be scary without something with Joist, because you're going to usually you would immediately n+1 those. And so you would almost have to go back to the forced, top level data loading that the client-side components force you to do, because the client-side components can't make database calls, so you have to do your big upfront JSON payload. And if you didn't have n+1 prevention like Joist does, you'd have to do the same thing for React server components. And so it seems like a pretty big win to use something like Joist or Joist to really have the benefit of distributed data loading. Not distributed like distributed systems, but decomposed data loading throughout your apps. And yeah, that's the second thing, that JSON payload creation. Kind of the third thing is maybe a quick, neat feature. A little bit of alpha or beta, but so we talked a lot about how Joist is really good at doing auto batching SQL statements, but we still have 1 call per tree. So one of the neat things that we've got in the works is JSON aggregate-based preloading. So if we go back to where we create our entity manager, and now we create this JSON aggregate preloader, it's going to kind of look at the operations that we've asked Joist to do and look for chances to where it can pull back multiple levels of our object graph at once. So we have to turn that on. And then this does, so while the n+1 prevention doesn't require upfront declaration of the data that you want to load, the preloading does. Which is fine. So let's add that in, because it's not required, but to avoid n+1s. So let's see. We're going to drop in that along with loading all of the authors, and we're just still loading them all. We're going to tell Joist kind of up front that I want all of the books, And besides the preloading that we'll go look at, we'll notice that right away this also changed from a list of authors to a list of loaded authors. And so, right away I can start doing things like authors sub0.books.get and immediately access them, the whole tree of data without asyncs. But what we wanted to see is, let's go look at our database queries. And so here's our top level. I'm rendering the table. And now we have just one query for the whole page and both sides of the page, where, this is a little esoteric, but what it's doing is still selecting everything from our authors table, author star. But when it saw that we wanted the books, so it's going to load the books too. Usually, each time you join into a table, you duplicate the rows. So if you go from author to books, and an author has 5 books, you're going to get the author repeated 5 times. And if each book has 3 reviews, the book and author will be repeated each time. But the way this cross-join lateral and then JSON aggregation works is when we have one row for the author, we lateral join into the books, but instead of creating new rows for each book, we use this JSON aggregation to make one column that is the books column that is an array of that author's books. And then, it would go on for the next author, and if he had 2 books, he'd have his book column would be an array of 2 books. And then if we were loading multiple levels of data, if we wanted books and reviews, within that book array, one of the columns in the book array would be the reviews for that book. And so, it's just kind of this Russian doll of JSON aggregation within this singular books column that would be the JSON representation of this author's books and the book's reviews, which really works out pretty slick. And just the one query. And so I think that's about it for the demo. Had fun putting it together. Again, disclaimer, kind of first time doing NextJS stuff, so would love if you want to poke around and find better ways of doing things, either just in the app sample app itself, or features that would make it even more neat in Joist. And this is just kind of a few of the killer features of Joist, but we have others like our backend reactivity features are quite neat too. So check those out. All right, thanks.